Good morning, and you're welcome to today's Signpost webinar. My name is Mark Gibson, and I'm the manager of the Teagasc ConnectEd Programme. As we come to the end of another week of lockdown, we hope that you're keeping safe and well. You might not believe it, this morning we actually had snow here in Galway, so let's hope it's a sign of a turning point in the weather. The Signpost series is brought to you by Teagasc in collaboration with Dairy Sustainability Ireland, the National Rural Network, and Food Drink Ireland SkillNet. The Water Framework Directive, which is the overarching legislation that governs water quality protection across Europe, sets standards for both the chemical and biological quality of our rivers, lakes, estuaries, and coastal waters. In its most recent report on water quality, the Environmental Protection Agency shows a continuing decline in water quality and that more needs to be done to protect our water environment. The main threats they've identified to water quality are the presence of too much nutrients such as phosphorus, nitrogen, which come primarily from agriculture and wastewater. Teagasc, government departments, industry, and farmers have come together to work to reduce these the impact of the sector on water quality. And I'm delighted to be joined by Eddie Burgess, Catchment Science Specialist with Teagasc, and Noel Meehan, ASSAP Programme Manager, also with Teagasc, to discuss these programs and the work that's going on in agriculture to reduce its impact on water quality. Good morning, Eddie and Noel. You're very welcome to the Signpost webinar.
Morning, Mark.
Morning,
everyone
Mark.
else.
And we're also joined by Pat Murphy, who's based down in Wexford. Pat, good morning to you.
Morning.
Good morning, Pat. Pat is our head of knowledge transfer on the environment program. So you're all very welcome. So Eddie, starting with you, you're working on the Catchments program. The Catchments program has been in place for a number of years now. Is that right?
That's right, Mark. Yeah, we've been in the same location, 6 different small catchment areas around the country, monitoring water quality in agriculturally based landscapes. We're on the ground, there's equipment on the ground 13 years now.
You've accumulated
a lot of that.
Yeah. So I know, Eddie, the last time you were with us, we had a few technical problems. So I hopefully we have those ironed out today, so we won't have a repeat of that. But
if it doesn't work today, Mark, I'm going to buy an abacus.
Okay. Back to first principles. And Noel, if I could turn to you, you're program manager of the ASSAP program. Could you tell us a little bit about the work you're doing there?
Yeah, Mark. I suppose we're working with farmers in 190 priority areas for action or catchments around the countryside. We're working in collaboration with the dairy industry and with our colleagues in LawPro, and we're basically trying to provide a service to farmers, to help them take on board actions or measures that will help improve water quality. As you indicated, it's not where we want it to be. So look, we're trying to do our best to help farmers on that front.
Yeah, no, it's a great example of collaboration and cooperation. So, Eddie, you're going to kick us off today, I think. So if I could ask you to share your screen with us, and a reminder to everybody, if you have a question that you'd like us to put to Eddie or Noel at the end of the presentation, please do send them through to us using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So Eddie, I'll hand over to you.
Thanks, Mark. And I suppose before we start, I'd just like to acknowledge our funders. The Catchments program has been operated by Teagasc, but we are 100% funded by the Department of Agriculture, Food and the Marine, and also in advance Noel with the ASSAP program, and all their staff are being funded by the Department of Agriculture and the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, and Dairy Sustainability Ireland. So I just like to acknowledge that at the outset. Very quickly, I have spoken before, as Mark alluded to earlier, but I'm guessing that not everyone got to tune in on that day. But just very quickly to give an overview of what the Agricultural Catchments Programme is, we are carrying out research, and we are also engaging with farmers and trying to get our message out, a knowledge transfer programme. And you can see there on the map where we have our 6 different catchment areas. And I said we have equipment on place heading on for 13 years now on the ground or in the river, as the case may be. The program is running a year longer than that. It took us a year to identify the locations and put all the equipment in place. Last year, the Department of Agriculture asked us to take on additional role for gaseous emissions, so our staff numbers have increased. We did have 16, and we now have 23 staff working with us. Technicians, researchers, advisors, data recorders, and administration staff. But none of this would be possible without the collaboration of the 300 approximately farmers that are managing land across the 6 catchment areas. Okay. The research is not just on biophysical elements. We're not just looking at water quality, nutrient transfer, and soil science. We're also doing research and trying to elaborate why farmers would change their practice, how much it costs them to implement the regulations and the directive, and what their attitudes are towards the rules. So there's a socioeconomic aspect to it as well. And as I've mentioned, we have a knowledge transfer aspect of it, and I suppose that what I'm doing just now would be an example of that. It's unfortunate due to the COVID-19, we can't get out and about and use the catchments as focus points, but that will come hopefully in the not too distant future. The initial reason, and I'd say the main purpose of the program, but is not the sole purpose, is that we are there to evaluate policy and the regulation, and things like the nitrates action plan and its derogation are being we are evaluating that and contribute to the reports under the Article 10 reporting going back to Brussels. That feeds into the Water Framework Directive, as Mark mentioned, and Noel, that unfortunately the trends in the last 4 years have stagnated and started to move in the wrong direction. Agricultural production policy under Foodwise is showing increasing intensification and looking for it. And we're trying to put figures on the term sustainable intensification. And as I mentioned more recently, the Climate Action Plan also we're now part of that. Getting into that. So how do we do all this? There is an awful lot of equipment and data in place, and it has been operating, taking very high resolution monitoring every 10 minutes. But what carries the nutrients, the weather has a huge impact, and each of our catchments has a weather station in them, and that data is available for people to see publicly online. We have a monitoring station at the outlet of the catchment, which is taking samples of water, as I mentioned, every 10 minutes and testing it for a number of parameters: nitrogen, phosphorus, total organic carbon, pH, turbidity, so on, every 10 minutes, very high resolution. You can imagine in 6 catchments, 10 minutes for 13 years and ongoing. There's a lot of figures there, and it's been managed in the database in Johnson & Castle, which is also quite complex. We're measuring the volume of water. That's one thing that at the start of the program, I was quite taken back by how much effort is put into measuring the volume of the water. And all this gives us a knowledge of the processes involved in nutrients getting into water and how water quality is being impacted, if it is, or why it isn't, if it's in good status. But none of this would be possible if we didn't have the collaboration of the farmers in the catchments. And you can imagine they didn't choose to partake in this. And you can imagine that they might have been somewhat cautious of a program coming down to evaluate nitrate regulations. And how have we engaged with them, and why have they worked with us? And I have to say quite positively that they are positive about the catchments program. So just to give you an idea of the type of findings that we have very briefly, there was a very heavy nights or days rain on the 30th of January, the second last day of January this year. And this is an example of what happened in Ballycue. The river went into flood at our outlet, at our Teagasc program. You can see there's a lot of water flowing by there. What does that tell us? Well, first of all, our weather station, we showed that there was 24 millimeters of rainfall. That's these blue bars coming down, showing that heavy rain. And the black line is the flow coming out of the river, how much water is leaving. And you can see the river on Saturday, early Saturday morning, the river went into flood. It didn't stay in flood very long, only maybe 6 hours, and then it came back down again. It was a very flashy catchment. Okay, that you might say that's obvious, but because we're also measuring the quality at the same time of the water, we can measure the concentration of phosphorus in this water. And not only did we have more water leaving, but every litre of water had more phosphorus in it, a multiple of phosphorus in it, possibly up to 10 times more phosphorus per litre at the peak from when we're looking at the base flow back here. And if you multiply the concentration by the volume, we get a figure for how much phosphorus left, the load of nutrient that left. And that flood event, only about 10 hours of rain, carried a total of 132 kilograms of phosphorus out of the catchment. And if we compare that to what we have got on average over the previous 11 years, actually 10% of the phosphorus left in that one rainfall event. And we can do these calculations over the year or for particular rainfall events or for the closed period. And it gives us a knowledge of the impact of different seasons, different farm practices, or different influences of weather. And this is what we do in the catchments program. It's our bread and butter. While there is 10% coming out there in a peak flood, and we need to target things like that, I'm not saying that that isn't of significance. The concentration at low flow during maybe the summer months is equally important. A flush out of nutrient over a 1 day period, the nutrients come, they increase, and they're gone out, and the Ballycanoe catchment is close to the sea in Cortown, and phosphorus in salty water isn't a nutrient of concern, so maybe that isn't have a big impact. What is having a larger impact in situations like that is the concentration when the river is in at base flow, at normal low level rivers. And under the Water Framework Directive, if the water body is to be classified as high status, the concentration of phosphorus should be below 0.025, and if it's to be good, it should be below 0.035. And if these are exceeded in base flow conditions, it will probably have a bigger impact on ecology than the big flush out event that I just showed you. In the Ballycanoe catchment, the soil tests has shown us that the soil is naturally, or well, not naturally, it is very low in soil P, and the farmers are not applying very much phosphorus. They're applying a lot less than what they're allowed to apply in the catchment. So you would expect that there is a low source of P being applied. You would expect in low flow that the levels of phosphorus in the river would be quite low. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And Sarah Vera did some work a number of years ago, and she compared the average annual concentration, which was 0.076, double what it should be. Now, this is total P. But she also took samples upstream and noticed that in the spring, the levels were lowest. In the summer, they had increased to quite a high level, and in autumn, they had dropped back again. And this was at 40 or 50 sampling points moving upstream. And she also noticed that actually the concentrations got more increased as you moved further downstream. And this is kind of an indication that there may be other sources feeding into it, point sources feeding into it, and the concentration building up as you moved further down. Another contrasting or kind of ironic thing, and I spoke about this in my previous presentation, was comparing the Castledockrell catchment, a free draining soil in County Wexford in the tillage area, with the Timoleague catchment in County Cork, also free draining but intensive dairying. It's just our Castledockrell is arable and slate, and Timoleague is mostly dairying and a sandstone base. you would expect the nitrate problem to be much higher in Timoleague because there is a much higher organic nitrogen loading and probably twice as high a chemical loading. And we have groundwater wells sampling water in these catchments to get an understanding of the below ground water transfer pathway with 3 bores on each slope. But the results have shown us that the hill slopes in the Castledockrell catchment have have twice the nitrogen leaving in comparison to the one that has 3 times the nitrogen loading. I'm just going to say that again, I was getting a bit tongue twisted there. The results have shown us that the hill slope with almost triple the nitrogen loading on the surface of the land has less than half the nitrate leaving in the stream. So why do we have such contradictions taking place? It doesn't always follow what you would expect. And quite simply, factors that affecting water quality are complex. They're contrasting. Nitrogen and phosphorus quite often contrast to each other. But the 3 things that impact on them, farm practice does impact on them. There's no doubt farm practice has an impact. And you would generally expect that the higher the load of nutrient being applied, the greater the risk of that nutrient being lost. And across the country, the EPA have shown that through monitoring of many, many more catchment areas than we have, that to be the case. Soil type and weather are also hugely important factors impacting on what water quality is. And what one farmer does on a free draining soil type could have a major impact, and someone on a high clay content soil, that would be irrelevant. And in a very dry, hot summer, you're likely to have maybe problems with nitrogen. And if we have a summer like 2012 where it rained all summer, then maybe that won't be the case. So really what I'm saying is one size does not fit all. It's a term that we have heard many times, but the result of that is that we need to be very clued in when we're selecting actions to try and mitigate the impact. And to do that, we need a very good understanding of the processes involved in nutrients getting into the water. And if we're working as an advisor with farmer trying to give them, we need to understand these. And if we want a farmer to take on these additional actions, they also need to know why. And the policymakers, both in the Department of Housing and the Department of Agriculture and in Brussels, also need to have a good understanding of the processes involved and in the EPA. But again, it is crucial that the people working on the ground need to have an appreciation and an understanding of why these rules are being put in place. Otherwise, there will be resentment and they'll feel that they're only curtailing their activities and their livelihoods. And with this in mind, and I think the whole purpose of Water Week is to try and come up, resolve this, it is very easy to oversimplify the issues that are causing problems in our water, especially if you don't have the knowledge of the processes involved. A small bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing. So how did we get the farmers to engage with us in the catchments programme and across the country to a greater extent, and hopefully this will continue. But a lot of the actions that we're asking people to do to improve water quality have other multifunctional benefits. An example of this would have been good nutrient management planning. It's taken soil samples, I think was the single biggest factor when I was working as an advisor with the catchments programme, going out to the farmers in Wexford with soil results and explaining the nutrient, sitting down at the kitchen table and explaining the nutrient stats of their soils with them. It was the single biggest factor that encouraged them to buy into the agricultural catchments programme. Particularly so in the tillage catchment, in the grassland catchment, when we did repeat samples and looked at fertility trends, I think they brought into it. But also good water quality will improve, generally coincides with good working conditions and a sense of pride on your farm at home. Other motivational factors would be that we are very significantly a food exporting country, and a lot of our main agricultural systems export 80 to 90% of what's being produced. and we market our food on a green image. And if water quality trends and gaseous emissions and so forth are moving in the wrong direction, it will be difficult to stand over these green credentials. And farmers are aware of this and are keen to hold on to that green image and try and boost their markets as much as possible. Equally, we have regulations coming on top of us, and I think it's not any coincidence that the dairy industry are concerned about the derogation in the nitrates directive, and as a result, when I'm giving talks, I notice that if I'm talking to a group of intensive dairy farmers, they tend to be a lot more interested in clued in than other sectors of agriculture that are probably not as dependent on the derogation. But the nitrates directive applies to all sectors, and it will evolve and be modified and amended every 4 years. There also are environmental schemes that increase motivation. But finally, I have to say that any mitigation actions that are being encouraged or enforced, they need to work. If the wrong action is put in place and it curtails production or output or someone's income, and it doesn't have an impact on water quality, then we all lose credibility. And there have been examples and cases of that. I know a number of years back, there was very significant buffer margins put in Denmark, and a lot of land was taken out of production. But Denmark is a very free draining soil type, and most of the watercourses were fed by groundwater, and a large buffer margin didn't do anything to stop nitrates feeding the springs that fed the rivers. So that was an example of a mitigation action that was ineffective and was in the wrong place. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Noel, who's working with the ASSAP program. I'm going to stop sharing, and hopefully I'll let Noel take over.
Okay, thanks, Eddie. And you wound up your presentation there with some, a statement that I think will be probably reused after today. If we don't have the right, the science behind the actions that we're proposing, and that they're we can't prove that they work effectively, and while we're potentially impacting on farmers' incomes and so forth, that really is crucial, and that's why it's so important that we have the catchments program there, testing those measures, testing the effectiveness of them. So Noel, you're all teed up there, ready to go. So we'll hand over to you, and we'll talk to you afterwards. You've about 15 minutes, Noel.
Yeah. Okay, Mark. Thanks, Eddie. So look, I suppose just to give maybe a little bit of background as to what the ASSAP is. Like Eddie, I'm sure some of you will know what it is and others won't. And I suppose it stands for the Agricultural Sustainability Support and Advisory Programme. And we work with farmers in 190 priority areas for actions, or PAAs. Our job is to provide a confidential, free and free advisory service to farmers inside those 190 PAAs, with 20 Teagasc ConnectEd dairy advisors, and we work very closely with LawPro, the Local Authorities Waters Programme. And why are we here? We're here because by 2027, under the Water Framework Directive, Ireland is supposed to have all waters at least good status by 2027. And for those who mightn't be aware, you're all aware of kind of the star rating for hotels. So you're looking at 4-star water, 4 or 5-star water is what we need. Anything below that is not meeting the target. That's what good status means. So LawPro provides the catchment science. They are the experts in identifying what the pressures and what the issues are. And if agriculture is identified as a pressure in PAA, well then that's where we come in. We go and engage with the farmers and we offer them an advisory service on that. And I suppose why Water Quality Week? I suppose the reason is that we've learned a lot from LawPro and from our engagement with farmers, and what we're trying to do is to bring those learnings to the wider farmer and industry audience, and try and get those messages out there. So that's what the idea behind Water Quality Week was. So I suppose just a little bit of information on ASSAP. We have completed just 1,810 farm assessments nationally to the end of December, with follow-up visits to 391 of those. And I suppose no more than any other sector of society, the ASSAP has been affected by the COVID-19 restrictions quite severely in the last 12 months. So we've had great engagement by farmers. 96% of farmers have engaged with us, and we've identified an awful lot of issues across all the farms of varying levels of severity or problem degree of problems, and 10,000, just over 10,000 of those, and the average number of issues per farm identified is 6. What pressures or what's impacting on the rivers and the water bodies out there? Well, just under 3/4 of the water bodies are impacted by diffuse losses. And when I talk about diffuse losses, I talk about phosphorus, sediment, and nitrogen. And diffuse losses are at a kind of a farm or a field scale, where you have a drip feed across a wide area. I suppose it's the exact opposite of what a point source is, where you have just a pipe or whatever. Point source losses, I think everybody's familiar with those. So diffuse is at a field or a farm scale, and those are nearly 3/4 of what the problems are out there. And I suppose just to give an idea of what we're finding, we have a way of tracking the level of implementation across by the farmers, and I suppose we'll get into maybe the ongoing one is one where there's practice change needed over a sustained period of time, and I'll go through that a little bit. So that's, most of them are ongoing, but we've a lot of work to do getting some measures started and going. And look, we haven't been out on farms since October because of lockdown, so there could have been work done that we just haven't been able to pick up yet. So we'll have to keep an eye on that and try and get as many measures as we can implemented to their full. So just, I'm not going to stay on this one because the rest of the presentation is actually going through all these issues. So these are the main 15 issues that we're finding out there. And they're across, nutrient management planning issues, they're across land management issues, and they're across farmyards. And I suppose, the most frequent one is the phosphorus loss through overland flow. That's the one that keeps coming up mostly, and then as they go along down there. So I'm just going to give you a flavour for what they are. So nutrient management issues, we're talking about, when organic fertilizer and when chemical fertilizers is spread, and that is really important from a diffuse loss point of view, because what you have is at the shorter periods of the year, you have a greater chance of nutrient being lost. And the reason you have a greater chance of nutrient being lost is because generally the winters are autumn, winter, spring. That's when you get your heaviest rainfall events, as Eddie showed in his video a while ago. You have a greater chance of soil being saturated or water moving through soil profile. It's also the coldest time of the year, so crops aren't growing. If they're not growing, they're not taking up nutrient, and that nutrient, if it's not being taken up by a crop, is available to be lost. So the growth rates are low, and then you obviously have the weather forecasts. You're, as I said, you're more likely to get those winter storms and those high period of storms, high periods. So we put a lot of focus into talking to farmers and explaining why it's important to be very aware of the weather when you're putting out when you're using your nutrients, particularly in that January, February, March period, and also in that September, October period when you're allowed to apply nutrients. And the science backs it up. Eddie's team there have produced a really good paper by Maria Chor, who's actually part of LawPro currently, and a disproportionately high level of nutrient loss occurs during the closed period. 43% of P and 45% of N. And Eddie's example there, that when they gave where 10% was P was lost in one storm event. That's if you have 3 or 4 of those, that's your loss of P from a catchment. So it's very important that I know a lot of people may feel the closed periods are a calendar farmer is something that they are not fond of, but they do have they are there for a reason, and where they are questioned, I think this kind of a science really backs up the reason for them being there. So other nutrient management issues all around nutrient management planning, and identifying the right fields where there's nutrient deficits and applying them appropriately, as opposed to loading them in around the farmyard or close to the farm. where you could have index 4 soils, and also lime. And lime is very important for improving the nutrient use efficiency. So if your lime is right, it releases phosphorus K. It makes the in that you apply uptake more efficiently. So it's very important that we have the nutrient management plan and that we implement it, because too often they get just thrown in the drawer and ignored. And again, then look at just going back to the weather. You have heavy rainfall and issues like that. They're all tied in. If you have a situation where too much fertilizer slurry goes out at the wrong time of the year, and you have weather like that, it's not going to end in a good place. So just to make farmers aware that sometimes it might be dry and the ground might be trafficable when you're going out, but if there's a week's rain forecast, you need to maybe think twice, or if you need to get it out, just drop it a foot or two as opposed to emptying a full tank, things like that. So then just look at the farmyards. Clean and grey water management, dirty yards. I think most farmers know about this, and everybody's very, very clear on what they are. I suppose the silage pits, and just need to be careful with maybe the expansion that's gone on in dairy, and that the corresponding increases in size and silage slabs hasn't occurred, and there has been a number of instances where pits have split and too much gone into them, and effluent gets escaping because channels aren't being kept clear and things like that. So trying to point those issues out to farmers and make sure that they're sound, structurally sound as well. This is your classic point source, where there might be a drain that can convey effluent or can convey soil water, that those need to be blocked off and the effluent captured and treated properly. And they do occur, unfortunately. And again, I suppose the slurry storage one is another one due to expansion. A lot of anecdotal evidence out there around not being enough slurry storage. If you don't have enough slurry storage, it means that you're going to have to go out in periods of the year where the weather isn't appropriate, and that can lead to its own problems. So it's important that I think it's a good opportunity now for farmers, listen online. There are advisors that's listening online, that you sit down once the calving is over, or maybe the BPS is over, sit down and have a good look at what you're doing in the farmyard, especially if you're after expanding in the recent past. A lot of what we're doing is trying to reiterate good practice around the regulations that's already there with regards to buffers, but you'd be surprised how many people don't actually know the buffers for slurry, and that they go from 5 to 10 meters in October and January, if you are putting out. So we need to start applying buffers much more. That there's a river just along the side here, and that's being offered great protection. You're looking at probably 10 or 12 meters of protection there where the slurry is. So any rainfall and overland flow that occurs there is going to be captured by the buffer. There's regulations in now about farm roads and for all farmers. So I think everybody that has a farm road alongside a stream needs to have a look at it and see if they need to make any adjustments or changes to it. Again, regulations around drinking points for irrigation farmers, sometimes they are impacting. It's certainly having cattle in a stream isn't going to improve water quality, but sometimes some impact more than others. But it's important that we address them. And I suppose the big one that's coming up, particularly around the south and east, is the diffuse nitrogen leaching from light soils. And there are maps out there called Pip Maps, and I know Jenny Deacon from the EPA is coming up at the end of April. And I think she'll be talking about the new generation Pip Maps that's coming out, but they're going to be used to help identify where you have these free draining soils that could disproportionately impact on nitrogen leaching. So it's about putting the right fertilizer at the right time, right rate, right location, right product. Okay. So I'll come back to the first one I mentioned, which was the phosphorus loss and overland flow. And this generally occurs on the heavier soils. So phosphorus loss is an issue, and sediment loss is an issue on the heavier soils, whereas nitrogen is an issue on the free draining soils. And the reason why phosphorus is an issue on the heavy soils is because when you have heavy rainfall, those soils get saturated much quicker. And any surface, any chemical fertilizer or P that's available on the surface, and the phosphorus that binds tightly to the soil particles or the soil sediment that can be washed off, those start to move across the surface of the ground and end up getting washed into the drainage network. So, you know, you have a situation like this where you have a large field that probably was, you know, 4 or 5 fields at one stage, but the ditches have gone, the water is moving down, landed in this kind of a wet area that obviously the farmer thought was, you know, he couldn't set a crop in because it's too wet, and you have this issue where water starts to flow over. So there's no protection there for that water body from the soil getting washed into it. So, you know, you're probably looking at this area here as a kind of a critical area that something needs to be done. And even back up here, what can we do to slow the water down from getting to the stream? So if you were to take an aerial photograph of that and maybe, you know, look at the way the water flows over the surface, you have these kind of preferential flow paths or channels that are there. And these, again, not to try and jump ahead of Jenny Deacon, these are new maps that the EPA have developed. And I know Jenny will go into a lot more detail about these in a couple of weeks, but just to make the point that, you know, there are points in the landscape like that where water is delivered into the field. So this is the overland flow that I'm talking about here, and obviously the redder the colour, the more volume of water that can end up into the stream. So you have these entry points here. So, you know, this is where the focus needs to be put by the likes of ourselves for the farmers to take on measures to prevent the access of nutrient and sediment, like what's happening in this picture on the left, into the stream network. And as I said, those are new focus soil delivery zone maps. Don't worry about the name, but these are new maps that the EPA have developed. So I know Jenny will go into a lot of detail, but just to give an example of what we could be doing here. So, you know, the picture that Eddie showed earlier on with the video, you know, quite a volume of water coming down there. You know, so how do we maybe manage that in a better way? And this maybe one coming down the middle here is an example. So I think what we need to do is to try and slow the flow down. As Eddie said, that was quite a flashy catchment. Obviously, it's highly drained. So Ballycanoe. So, you know, maybe you need to. This isn't Ballycanoe, by the way, but you need to maybe look at trying to slow the water down. You need to put in something like maybe hedgerows, or you put in kind of low earthen mounds or bunds, you know, just to slow the water down and maybe trap it for 24 hours and then maybe release it slowly after the peak of the rain is passed. You know, you could look at maybe putting in some woodlands for water, where basically you're trying to put in some woody habitat that again will, you know, hopefully slow it down, improve infiltration, stabilize, capture some nutrient at that point. You know, maybe all this drainage has caused the water to speed up, which in turn is causing erosion of banks. So there might be need for some riverbank supports, you know, improving debris or rock armoring or something like that. There may be an opportunity to put in a small wetland pond that will have benefit as well from maybe potentially nitrate, but also from a biodiversity greenhouse gas area. And then you're looking at sediment traps or leaky dams. Again, the idea is to slow the water down, to trap the sediment, to let the sediment settle out, let the phosphorus settle out. So those are the kind of things that we could be talking to with farmers. But I suppose, you know, it's all new. It goes above and beyond what is in the regulations that are there at the minute. And as well as that, you know, ASSAP, we're coming talking to farmers and relying on their goodwill. There is no funding like what would be in the EIPs for this kind of stuff, you know, so we don't have the funding behind it to pay farmers to put these things in or to incentivize farmers to put these things in. So look, there are options there, and I suppose our job is to try and get as many of these kind of things implemented in the suitable locations. So we're trying to put the right measure in the right place to prevent water loss or to prevent nutrient sediment loss. So look, just to summarize there, because I know we're getting late and Mark is probably sweating there a little bit, but the overall summary is that water quality is declining. You know, the main issues are diffuse P, sediment in losses, and point source are still an issue. It's all about the soil type, the weather, and farm practice. So when you combine all those three, they all are influencing water quality, and you won't solve one without you won't solve the water quality issue without dealing with all three of those. And what we really need is the mitigation actions that we're recommending for farmers that need to be implemented and maintained over a period of time to improve water quality. That's the message that I want to get out there, that we need to get these implemented or we won't see improvement in water quality. So just to finish up and just from Water Quality Week, there's a number of people that just want to do a quick thank you to, because I think it'd be Water Quality Week didn't just happen. There was an awful lot of work that went on behind the scenes, and the advisors in the ASSAP programme from both Teagasc and Co-op have done a lot of work, and Law Pro as well have come on board and took over a day for us. So thanks to all those. I'd like to thank the ACP and the researchers in Johnstown Castle, Eddie and his team, and down in Johnstown Castle as well, the researchers down there, and the guys that helped with the video editing across the Teagasc organisation. Our PR team have done an excellent job in getting the message out there. And I just want to also thank Yvonne Maher. She's our colleague on the ASSAP programme, and she's worked tirelessly there behind the scenes, making sure that all the content was available and in the correct order and ready to go for each day. You know, they worked late into the evening, making sure that the website was updated this week. So I think it has run very smoothly, and a lot of that credit for that needs to go to Yvonne. So with that, Mark, I'll wrap it up there.
Thank you, Noel. I just wanted to say congratulations to you and all of the people who are involved in Water Week. There's a huge amount of content has been created for the social media channels, but also the Teagasc website. I think there's a really excellent resource there now available for anybody who is interested in finding out these, in particular, the fact sheets, I think, are excellent. The ASSAP fact sheets that are available. So if anybody wants to find out more about that, you can go to the teagasc.ie, and there's a link there on the homepage. It'll bring you directly to all of the resources that are available on the Water Quality Week. So well done on that. So we've lots of questions coming through here, so we won't hang about too long, but I just wanted to just to tease out that figure there. The Noel, you mentioned the 96% engagement from farmers. Surely that shows us that there is an appetite there amongst farmers to do the right thing.
Yeah, look, I think it's, you know, maybe to wind it back a small little bit, and we'll say, you know, the original, the first river basin management plan, and, you know, the review that went on there, and, you know, I suppose the second river basin management plan learned from the first and adopted a far more consultative, far more engagement, far more collaborative approach, and you know, where as opposed to going with regulation and you know, inspections and so on, they said, look, you know, we need to start engaging with farmers at a different level, and we need to start bringing in an advisory service. And look, I think it's credit to the departments and the EPA for recognizing that and for putting steps in place. So look, I think it's part of that, and part of the good work by the advisors as well, because, you know, we're walking off the road pretty much with a little bit of you know, there wouldn't necessarily be the advisor that would be dealing with normally. So I think credit goes to the advisors as well, that they're able to build up a rapport and explain what they're about and get farmer engagement. And look, it is quite high. I kind of expected maybe to come back a little bit, because, you know, to be straight up about it, you know, the co-op advisors are going to their co-op clients, so you'd expect that would have a good strike rate there. Ourselves have been, you know, working with Teagasc clients, but also non-Teagasc clients, but it's only more recently that we'll be getting the non-Teagasc clients due to GDPR issues. We didn't know who they were, so now we're engaging with those. So look, it may come back a little bit, but I don't expect it to bottom off or anything like that. But you know, it is really good, and I think the farm orgs have come behind us really, really well as well, and they've bought into it really well, and helped you know, alleviate any fears about the program to their membership. So, you know, look, I think it's definitely the whole collaborative thing where we've engaged has dividends in that front.
Had some good questions coming through there.
Yep. I suppose some on the technical side. One, a couple of questions for Eddie in relation to the tests and the importance of the high resolution, the high speed testing, the 10 minutes relative to, I suppose, more periodic testing. And then another question in relation to what are the key tests as indicators of water quality?
Yeah, very good questions, and quite simple questions, but to the nub of it. I suppose I could give a rhetorical question. What tests are needed for water quality? What is water quality? What do you mean by water quality? Is it safe to drink? Drinking water quality is different from an ecological status water quality. The ecological status in our estuaries is impacted by nitrogen, and the standard for nitrogen in our estuaries is 2.6 milligrams per litre. The drinking water standard is 4 times higher than that. It's 11.3 on the nitrate nitrogen measuring, which is the equivalent of 50 milligrams of nitrate. I think another question there is asking, are we looking at microbial interaction? Like drinking water standard would be looking at E. coli and other types of things that would make it unsafe for you to drink with. We're not looking at those as a water quality type issue. But I suppose from the Water Framework Directive, there's nutrient status, and the 2 nutrients that we're concerned with are nitrate and phosphorus, and they're different for, as I mentioned, for ecological status or for drinking water status. But at the end of the day, I think the vast majority of water bodies that are not reaching the status are not for the Water Framework Directive are falling down on the ecological status of the river, which is assessed through a kick sample and looking at diatoms and the life living in the riverbed. And the frequency that we carry out that in the catchments is twice a year, and we compare it between the summer and the spring. Spring and autumn ecological status, and that's not needed at the same level. But coming back to the question, doing it every 10 minutes, that gives us a very detailed understanding of the processes involved. And we wouldn't be able to calculate the loads of nutrient leaving, particularly with point sources and flashy events like phosphorus. Nitrate concentrations don't vary to the same extent as what we would have seen in the graph that I showed earlier on there, and possibly a lower resolution would be sufficient there. But I'd be cautious saying that. As I mentioned, a small bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing, and I'd refer you to our researchers more on that.
I suppose one more question, aimed at Noel. How do you navigate with farmers who are upstream and don't see the impact of their practices? They may be missing a sense of pride, and it's just a case of where is the impact identified, and how do you deal with it? It's not all about the last few farmers in the catchment.
Can I come in on that one, Pat? Sorry,
yeah.
Before Noel comes in there. I think that's a very, very good question. Our main, and I'm coming back to the graph I showed of Sarah Viro's work with the synoptic survey, where she took 50 samples moving upstream in the river. Our main outlet, taking samples every 10 minutes, is at the outlet of the catchment. And there's 40 farmers in the catchment. And there is other activity going on in the catchment. There's wastewater treatment facilities from villages, from schools, and more. And if any one of those is out of line, it could undo all the excellent practice that has been done by the majority of people working in that catchment. And that could demotivate people to do a good job. And often, what I like about the Water Framework Directive is it's trying to have a whole community approach and bring everyone together. And I think if we start putting one sector of agriculture against another sector, or one sector of society against another, we're not going to achieve good water quality. And we need to work together to do that. And that is not easy. And farmers will often complain about municipal wastewater treatment plant facilities not doing a good job. And we know there are places in the country that don't have wastewater treatment facilities. And if you're a farmer in one of those catchments, you're not going to be so keen to spread your story on time. So what's the point? Someone else upstream is doing it. Or if you have a neighbor who's a farmer who has bad practice, you won't be as motivated. Equally, the example I often take is tillage farmers in Athy in County Kildare. It's not a county known for sailing. It doesn't have a coastline. but tillage is known for causing nitrogen. It's nitrogen risky. It doesn't cause that problem until it gets to the estuary and when you get out to sea. And it's difficult to try and encourage farmers in a location where the impact is not on their doorstep. That's why we have something like Water Week.
No, you might address it in how the, I suppose, Law Pro and ASSAP are working together in that kind of full length of the catchment.
Yeah, like I think Eddie admitted, spoke very well there. But I suppose just from the ASSAP point of view, you know, by and large, where we're working, it would be in the headwaters of catchments. Now, it's not exclusively the case, and that is a problem, exactly as the person has asked, that, you know, we could be in one water body, but this is actually the water body that's upstream that's impacting, and we're not working there yet. But that will be fixed in the third river basin management plan if we're all rolled over to that. That they're looking at moving upstream. So what we're trying to do is work from the headwaters down along, so as that you fix the headwaters and make sure that the water coming out of the headwaters is of a good status, and then you come down the next floor, the next water body, and you try and fix that, and you work it down towards the estuary. So it's a methodical from the top down kind of approach. And you're right, like we have noticed that in Law Pro have noticed that, in that, you know, where they haven't picked the headwaters, or maybe a water body down or two down along the river network, they find that it's been impacted from above, and we can't do anything about that currently, but that hopefully would be resolved in the third river basin management, and we add those in as PAs.
Eddie, could I ask you a question there in relation to slurry spreading? One of the viewers here he's acknowledging that the interactions there between soil and nutrients are complex and often difficult to understand. But he's saying here also that there is a closed period, and that farmers should not spread on waterlogged or frozen lands, but yet that these practices in some instances are still occurring, and sometimes on derogation farms. This is viewer is saying here. So why are these simple practices not being adhered to? I suppose that's the question here, and how can we expect to retain the derogation if this continues? So I suppose the question, and look, it's for both of you really, but I mean, there's a minority of farmers that we know that are continue to spread slurry in unsuitable conditions.
Yeah, there is, and it's frustrating. And every 4 years, and more recently every 2 years, the nitrates regulations are being reviewed. And it is difficult to say that we need to review them if the current regulations are not being applied across the board, because not only do we have a closed period, we also have a storage requirement, which is some weeks longer than the closed period. And we're not meant to be spreading when heavy rain is forecast or when soil conditions are unacceptable. So if there's heavy rain coming on the 1st of February, depending on what part of the country you're in, or on the 14th of January, our soils are saturated at that time. If you have complied with the regulations, you should have sufficient storage to keep you from having to spread land on such time. But unfortunately, there are cases where people don't have sufficient storage, and if your tanks are full, you're going to have to get out and spread. And that is impacting on water quality. And our monitoring has shown that there is a disproportionately high load of nutrient leaving during the closed period in the winter months when soils are saturated. And I see there's also a query there saying why October isn't closed and isn't opened and January closed. Sorry, and again, this is the contrast between nitrogen and phosphorus. If we had an exceptionally dry period during the closed period and you were on a free draining soil type and the water table had dropped, from a phosphorus point of view, spreading slurry during the closed period wouldn't cause a problem in that scenario. Now, I'm not saying that people should go out and spread it then, because slurry also contains plenty of other nutrients. It's a good source of potash, which it should dictate where it goes, but it's also a good source of nitrogen. And spreading slurry in October really means that you're kissing goodbye to the nitrogen that's in that. If you're kissing goodbye to that nitrogen, you're wasting money. And this is the mutual benefits that I'm trying to talk about. But you're also, if you're going to lose it, it's either going to go into the water or into the atmosphere. And at that time of the year, the likely route is it's going to go into the groundwater. And we need to think of both from a water quality point of view. We need to think of both nitrogen and phosphorus, and they contrast to each other.
Okay, thanks, Aidan.
Tying them in together can confuse the choice of action.
Noel, have you any comments on that?
Yeah, look, I suppose maybe go back to what I said during the presentation there. I think, you know, it's becoming less. I think farmers need to have that, maybe have expanded in the recent past, need to sit down with their advisor and do up a proper audit of their farm with regards to slurry storage and silage pits, if they need bigger silage pits, and their dairy washing and their soil water and all those other kind of things. And, you know, take an opportunity to try and rectify that as soon as they can, because it is leading to problems. Okay, you know, you're under pressure straight away during the winter period, and you know you're asking contractors to put slurry out when you shouldn't be putting it out, and we know that it is impacting on water quality, either through a nitrate leaching issue in the more free draining areas, or, you know, phosphorus loss through overland flow, like what we've explained. So I think my advice would be to advisors that are listening in, or farmers that are listening in, you know, sit down with your client, or sit down with your advisor and do a serious audit and look to try and rectify those problems, because, you know, the industry is very much in the spotlight at the minute, and I think it's incumbent on all of us to try and you know, put forward industry in the best light that we can. And these kind of things don't do the industry any favors, and we need to, you know, it's the law, it's the regulations, we need to comply. And I would strongly encourage farmers to engage with their advisor, or likewise the advisor to contact farmers that they know might have expanded, and to ask them to consider improving their facilities.
A question there, just asking about well, it says what two things can farmers do to improve water quality, and what two things can regulators do to effectively improve water quality? I know I've answered this question before by saying, well, listen, you can't pick the two things for farmers because it depends on where they are. But Noel, I might get you to comment.
Yeah, well, look, I think you're right. It depends on if you're phosphorus kind of risky areas. That's your heavier soils. Those maps that I showed you earlier on, where we can see those focused delivery pathways, they're on their way. I know there's a question there when they're going to be out. EPA are working really hard to get them out. There's technical issues there at the minute because of the sheer size of these maps. It's very difficult to get a platform that can show these to people. So that's what's delaying it. But I know Ginny Deacon is coming on at the end of the month, and she will have more updated that for that question. So I would use those maps to identify those critical source areas, those critical points where water is moving across your land and delivering nutrient and sediment into the streams. And I would come up with a plan in conjunction with your advisor or ASSAP advisor, whoever it is, to do something about that, to minimize those losses. That's the first thing you do. In the nitrogen side of it, I would start looking really seriously at my slurry storage, my nutrient use in the shoulder periods of the year. So that September, October, right through January, February, March period, that you become really, really aware of what the weather forecast is, the soil temperature, the soil moisture deficit, you know, that kind of thing. That'll go a long way to improving water quality. I suppose from a regulator point of view, I would suggest that maybe, you know, the regulations are there. If we had better application of those or compliance of those, it may reduce a lot of the issues that are out there. I don't know whether bring us all the way, but I think it would help bring us a lot closer to where we need to be.
Okay, we're get really tight on time. I don't know where that hour went. There are some lovely questions that are coming through that we just don't have time to deal with today, but maybe we could catch up on those again, because I know there's some questions around pristine, high quality waters in uplands that I think needs to be discussed as well. But maybe we might bring that up with Jenny Deacon the next day. Before we go, I just want to let you know that we do have a new April schedule announced. And next week, we'll be speaking to Helen Sheridan and Tommy Boland from UCD about multi-species swards. And just to note that next week's webinar will take place next Thursday morning, the 1st of April, because of Good Friday. And you can see the rest of the lineup for April on our website. For example, we'll be talking to Tom Houlihan and Kevin Black around climate mitigation options through forestation on the 9th of April. So there's a full lineup there available. Noel and Eddie, thank you so much for excellent presentations. And you got some tough questions along the way there. No doubt we're going to have to address this topic again because there's such interest. I think one group that we didn't mention was maybe the agricultural contractors, and I think that's a group that we could work with in the future in terms of improving practices around slurry spreading and fertilizer spreading and so forth. So maybe that's something we can pick up on again. Pat, thanks very much for your help on the questions, and I want to thank our production team, Yvonne Maher and Andy Boland, for their support in the background. And a reminder again that all of the information that we discussed today will be available on the Teagasc website. It was a recording also of today, and we will have, I'd encourage you to take a look at the resources available under the water quality section on the Teagasc website. So with that, thanks for watching, and we will catch you next Thursday at 9:30. Thanks again.